Okay, this lesson for our Quantity Project class, we'll look at the number E. I'll have this book listed if you'd like to read that somewhere sometime. But in a 2003 article on Koinonia House, Chuck Missler, he's well renowned in his research and scholarship, but he had mentioned that ancient Hebrew teachers once calculated the numeric value, since we know Hebrew is pictographic, numeric, and phonetic. And of course, we've seen this before. We've done a video, and I'll put a link to that one where we actually worked it out. And of course, you have 7 words, 28 letters. And then, of course, when calculated accordingly, it says take the number of letters times the product of the letters, and then the number of the words times the product of the words. You get 3.1416 times 1017, the value of pi to 4 decimal places. So he was observing that phenomenal fact. What I was observing was how they used the multiplication, which is what Dr. Penn did in the ratio, one day to 1,000 years, 1,000 years to a day. And he noticed the inverse relationship, which is third grade arithmetic, and we multiplied it. So we'll look at that in just a moment. But in John 1:1, the creation text here, specifically in the Koine Greek text, we notice that this, when we did the same application of arithmetic, we noticed this equaled the number E, 2.71828. Now, to remember this, when you have nothing better to do, is just double repeat the 1828. And then, of course, there's a nice triangle we're all familiar with. It's 45, 90, and 45 degrees. So that's far enough. And if you're in a coffee shop talking to your friends, they definitely will think that's far enough. And then one thing about science, we discussed how consensus theology can have a strong aversion to information, as we learned about. Let's say we tried to study depravity and we just simply did what any academic educational environment would encourage us to do. Let's just look for a lexical definition. We then went to the Septuagint to find Koine Greek to match Matthew 7:11, to notice what are we looking at and correlating Genesis 2:9 with Matthew 7:11, and we notice there's pushback. Well, that same aversion exists in science, whether the scientist is an atheist or not. He has a professional career on the line. We had a documentary we reviewed at our church before, where the penalties against scientists for any of their work which results in indicating veracity or truth or accuracy of the scriptures, and of course ignoring that calculus was developed by a theologian. Without it, we wouldn't have anything we know today as far as technology. So there's genealogical, and genealogies, and then chronological age. Chronological is our days, our years, our etc. Referential time that we were given in the book of Genesis and taught that it was for us to understand seasons and times. Then we have the veracity of Christ in his genealogy. And then we have this geological age. Well, if science were to equate this with chronological, which that can be intentional or they can't afford to say otherwise, then they are not defining it. But again, they don't use the Bible as source material like an Einstein, a Teller, and an Oppenheimer, or a Leibniz or Richard Feynman of the Space Shuttle Challenger 1986 explosion. And he noticed that calculus, and even said it in an interview, is the language that God speaks. So can we find E, since we should expect it? Because something I'm currently working on is, where is pi in relationship to creation, since we have in the creation Old Testament text the numeric value pi, and then in the creation text of John 1:1, the New Testament, we have E, and yet we can find, as we've learned, we remember we had the young earth assertion was 6 to 20,000 years, and that was a difference delta of 14,000. So as Dr. Johnson and I, research assistants for Dr. John Penn, then took the difference of 7,000 and started with 6. So we started 6,000 and went in increments of 250. So we just put 6,250 at 12 hours a day. That's why you can do this with the English Bible. You don't need the Greek or the Hebrew. And then, of course, at 12 hours a night, Jesus said literally there's 12 hours in the day, 12 hours a night. There we go. So we give our total here 24 hours. And then all we had was this missing here. And then we would multiply this by 360 days, chronological, because remember it's 1 day to 1,000 years. And again, this is so much easier to work this out, but we can demonstrate that it would be impossible for science to show how these contradict, since we have a ratio that's irrefutable, and because of the number E and the veracity of it, we should expect to find it. So 360 days, and that equaled 4.5 million days. And then, of course, multiply that by 1,000 years. And that equaled the 4.5 billion years. But that's the geological. So here's the Earth, for example. Here's the universe. Now, again, if you're a scientist, you're not allowed to teach this. And in some circles, if you're a religionist, where a consensus theology is formed, where it's a consensus of old or a consensus of young, you might not be encouraged or even, in any way viewed in a positive light if you just take the Bible and continue to work what we can know. Because remember, E is also used for compounding interest rates. Well, we're not talking about interest rates, and you just put an R in the equation for rates of interest and compound. But what we're looking at is the rate of decay and the compound sin, as the Bible says, a little leaven leavens a whole lump. And it said that through one man's disobedience, sin entered into the world, and death followed. Death is the consequence of that sin, which, like leaven, continues to exponentially. So then we just go this direction. Remember, scientists aren't allowed to do this. Consensus science and the academic penalties against them. As Dr. Al Mohler once said, there'd be theological expense to pay if you retained an old earth position. I don't know what that means. That discourages study and research. Why? I don't know why anyone would want to do that. But you take 4.5 and now multiply it instead of years, days, and that's approximately 2.78 360-day years, and that gives the 12.5 billion. But remember, science has no vested interest being served by noticing the distinctions between geological ages, genealogies that are 100% correct. This is 100% correct. Chronological ages, which are 100% correct. And all of this is from the Bible. So if you are discouraged or you notice there's just always bias, well, if someone is, let's say, comes from the view of Calvinism, they support Calvinism and use the Bible as a support for Calvinism rather than the opposite. We're here to support the Bible, not use it to support us. And then, of course, Lutheranism, Arminianism, whatever, it's endless. And if you're primed in a Catholic tradition or a Protestant tradition or Judaic, Islamic, occultic, New Age, well, all that is just completely irrelevant for us who research and do this work. So this is really fascinating. And yes, we found E. And as Dr. Penn said, we should have expected that. And of course, I'm learning to no longer be surprised at the outcome or research. My daughter-in-law is a math teacher, and she had this shirt, and I noticed it, and she bought me one. And I was fascinated by the freedom we have to study and the encouragement we have, especially when you attend the oldest Bible school in the state of Arkansas, and you know that its accreditation is unquestioned when you attend any state university in Arkansas. They receive all of our hours. So it's encouraging. It's good to know our work is here. And again, the burden would be on science to come up with an explanation of why they're calling geological age chronological age, confusing the two, and then why they're not availing themselves of this source material that we know the Bible to be, from which things like Einstein, Teller, and Oppenheimer found it very resourceful in developing their understanding, and people like Leibniz and Newton found it very resourceful as they were theologians who developed calculus. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson, and remain curious, as I am now, to find where is the number pi, as E is in the ratio that was discovered and now disclosed. Where is pi in its relationship to creation, since this value is given? So we had E given in this account, and we found it in the ratio of 1 day to 1,000 years, 1,000 years to a day. So that's what I'm looking for right now. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.